For WordPress sites hosted on WP Engine, the user portal can be used to easily manage your accounts, sites, and environments, to trigger site backups, to manage your domains, and so on. But what if you want to take some of those same actions programmatically using code? Thankfully, you can do exactly that using the WP Engine API. In this video, you'll learn what the WP Engine API is and what you can do with it. I'll demonstrate how to get started, including making your first API request. And then finally, we'll walk through a practical, real-world command line interface app powered by the WP Engine API that allows users to manage their accounts, sites, and environments. To kick things off, let's learn a bit more about what the WP Engine API is and the kinds of things that you can do with it. You can see here that I'm at wpengineapi.com, and I've clicked over to the API reference page. So here you can see that the WP Engine API is a REST API, and we have documentation on this page for all of the endpoints that it offers. So if I scroll down to the site resource, for example, you can see all of the different CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete, that it's possible to perform on that resource. So if you want to get a list of your sites, you would use this endpoint by sending a GET request. If you want to create a new site, get a site by its ID, delete a site, and so on. We have documentation for each of these. Let's say for the project I'm working on, I want to create a new site. Right? So I'd hover over this drop down here and expand it. And you can see here, there's detailed documentation for all the parameters that this endpoint requires. So we have an authorization header you have to include, and then also a body object. And inside of that, we have to provide the name that we're going to use for this new site, as well as the account ID. So which WP Engine account is this site going to belong to, right? What about a response back, right? What can I expect back after I hit this endpoint? Further down, this section answers that question. So we have the responses listed here. So if it's successfully created, this new site, then you can expect a HTTP 201 status back. And in the response, you'll see an object like this, right? Where it has information about the new site that was created. Now, what if there's an error though? If something goes wrong with trying to create this new site, further down you'll see other possible statuses. So if you had if you received a 400 error response back, this is what the response would look like. If you had 401, 403, and so on. So this documentation makes it very helpful for knowing, what parameters or arguments are required when you hit the API, but then also all the statuses and responses that you can expect back when interacting with particular endpoints. So now that you understand what the API is and the different types of endpoints it has, you may be wondering, okay, well, how do people use this for real? Like use this in the wild? What are some common use cases for this kind of thing? So to answer that question, I want to take a look at this blog post that I wrote here on this same topic of working with the WP Engine API. And specifically, we'll hop down to the what is the WP Engine API section here. And you can see we have listed a few common use cases. So the WP Engine API is particularly useful for agencies managing multiple client sites. So you can automate things like site creation, user management, and domain configuration. So just imagine that, if you work for an agency and you land a new client or a new project, you can, write a script where maybe with one command, you can, create a new site on WP Engine. You can assign it several different environments, production, staging, development environments, all in one shot, and even add some of the developers, who work on your team as users, on that site, give them all access to it, all in one action. So things like that could, help to speed up your workflow. Another example is for, DevOps teams, if you wanted to do some scripting in your CI/CD pipelines. So you can imagine, you could set up a GitHub action, for example, where every time a code update is pushed to a GitHub repo and that GitHub action runs, it could hit one of the WP Engine API endpoints to bust the cache for that certain site, or to trigger a site backup, or take some other action like that. Another example is to create a custom dashboard. Maybe going back to the agency example, if you're work for an agency or even a brand, maybe you just want to create your own little interface where you have a list of all the sites that you have, and then below those you can see each environment, production, staging, development, with a few links to quickly jump to that environment, or manage them, add or delete them. If you wanted to create a little dashboard for yourself just to get a bird's eye view of all your things you have in your WP Engine account, you could do something custom like that. Next example here is for scheduled maintenance. So you could automate routine tasks like creating backups or purging caches. Some of the examples I went through a moment ago, spoke to that. And the last one on this list is bulk operations. So if you want to perform actions across multiple sites simultaneously, so if you have 5 sites and you say, I want to create a staging environment for all 5 all in one shot, right? Instead of going into each site and doing that manually, in our visual user portal for WP Engine, you could write a script that would iterate through all 5 and do that all at once. In this next section, what can you do with the API? It lists specifically some of the operations that are available. So you can list WP Engine accounts, account users, list and manage sites, list installs or environments, configure domains, create backups, do stuff with purging caches, and then manage SSH keys. One thing I'll point out as well at this point is when you go to the WP Engine user portal, you'll see the term environment used to represent your production, staging, and development environments for a certain site. In the WP Engine API, though, the term install is used. So back in the API documentation here, if we head down to the install section right here, this really refers to environments. Those two terms can be used interchangeably. Those mean the same thing. Now that we understand what the WP Engine API is all about, let's go ahead and fire off our first request and see how we can use it. Before we can do that, though, we need to enable the WP Engine API. So to do that, I'll refer you over to this Support Center article on the WP Engine Customer API here. If you scroll down a bit, you can see it has the first section that covers Enable WP Engine API. So the steps are listed here, but really it just boils down to 2 clicks. On the API access page in the WP Engine user portal, you just toggle this switch to on to enable the API, and then click this button to generate some credentials. Once you do that, that'll give you your username and password that you can then copy and store in a secure place. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and fire off our first request now that we're ready to do so. For this example, I'll go ahead and steal some code from this blog post that I've been referencing on this same topic. So if we head down to the Getting Started section here, it has a Making Your First API Request section with a code example. So we're going to go ahead and copy and paste this and run it and see if we can get some information about the authenticated user who's using the API here. So I will just create this file here, userinfo.js. You can see right now it's blank. Let's go ahead and copy and paste this code and see if we can run it and access the API. So I'll copy and paste this whole thing into this doc, and let's review it really quick. So at the top, we're just going to hard code the API user ID and password. Of course, in a real application, you wouldn't want this sensitive data committed to version control and in your actual code. You need to store it someplace securely, like an environment variable. But for now, just for this proof of concept, initial request, we'll go ahead and hard code it here. We have this little expression here that creates an authentication header. And then below, we have a get user info function that gets executed right away when this file is run. And you can see what it does. It uses fetch to hit the WP Engine API's v1/user endpoint, and then it passes in that authentication header. If the response isn't okay, it throws an error to let us know. Otherwise, it will parse that response as JSON, and then go ahead and console log that data so we can see this info about the logged in user. So let's see if we can actually go ahead and run this. I'll pop open my terminal, and then from here we can write node user info.js to execute this file. So I'll hit enter, and then after a moment, you can see here that we get the expected output. It says user information, and then we're presented with an object representing the response that we got back. So this is how to interact with the WP Engine API at a very high level, and you can follow this similar pattern to what we saw here with lots of other endpoints, right? For some practical examples like this written in JavaScript, again, back in this blog post, I have a lot of those provided. If you scroll down just past that getting started section, the next section here is core API functionality. So you can see an auth helper function that you can include in your projects if you'd like, that gets the username and password from environment variables and then uses those to create the authorization header. And then from there, there's a bunch of examples of helper functions. So you can create this list of accounts function, for example, that hits the v1/accounts endpoint just to get a list of all the accounts. You can manage the account users here. You can list your sites, create a new site, right? So you can just feel free to copy and paste any of these examples if they're relevant to what you're doing, and do use very similar code in your applications if that's useful. Next, let's take a look at a real-world demo project that uses the WP Engine API to create a command line interface tool. For that, we'll head over to this GitHub repository here. This is a WP Engine Site Management CLI tool. It's an interactive command line interface for working with the WP Engine API and managing your WordPress sites and installs. You can see here that there's an animated GIF that shows you, what this tool looks like when you use it. You can see here under the overview section allows you to browse the accounts you have access to, view sites within each account, view your installs, aka environments within each of those sites, create and delete sites, and also create and delete installs or environments here. So to use this project, if you want to clone down and use it yourself, you'd clone the repo, install the dependencies with npm install, create a .env file with your credentials inside like that, and then just run npm start to boot it up and try this for yourself here. On my local environment, I've gone ahead and done all of those steps here. So you can see I've run npm install to install the modules as well as added my credentials in .env. So at this point, I'm ready to run npm start and boot up this app to use it. So let's see what that looks like. So here from the directory where this command line app lives, I'll go ahead and run npm start. And after a moment, you'll see I'm prompted to select an account. So here are the accounts that I have access to on WP Engine. I'll go ahead and choose this one for my name and hit enter. It says loading sites, and then after a moment, I get a list of all the sites that I have access to, right? And this is the same list of sites that you would see visually if you were doing this all, from the WP Engine user portal. So from here, I can, drill down and view information about any of these sites. Let's choose this one here for this test. We'll choose my site test ZZZ. I'll go ahead and hit enter there. It says loading installs, and then after a moment, I have a similar screen listing each of the installs. And again, an install is the same as an environment. Those two terms are interchangeable. So here, for this particular site, you can see that we have a staging environment and a development environment currently, but no production environment. So let's say that the developers on our team, they've been working hard on this site in development, and the staging site looks good. We're ready to go to prod. We want to create that production environment. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'll arrow down to add install and then hit enter here. This tool prompts me for the name of the site. So I'll say, in similar fashion, I'll say ZZZ test site prod, something like that. Select environment. So you can see production currently is my only option. If there weren't a development and staging site already, you would see those listed as well, right? There would be three options there to create those other types of environments. Because they exist already, though, this CLI tool is smart enough to know, oh, the only one left to create then is production. So go ahead and hit enter to create that production app. All right, so the curse of the live demo has happened here, and I actually hit an error, but I'm going to leave this in the recording because this is a perfect example of some error output that you can expect to get back. So in this case, it says I received a 400 bad request response back, and the reason I'm given here is name is too long, right? Maximum is 14 characters. So this is good to know. You can see my CLI application, it doesn't handle this very gracefully, right? At the moment, it just takes the error output and just prints all of that to the screen. So in a command line tool that you're building for your agency or brand or whatever, maybe you want to, instead of just spitting out the JSON, render this these kinds of errors in a more user-friendly way. But for now, this suits our purposes just fine. So I'm going to try this again and try to have use a shorter name to see if we can get a success message. So I'll hit any key to continue, and then finally let's try again. So I'll go to add install zzz test prod. So let's try something like that. It's a bit shorter this time. And again, select the production environment. It says adding install, and then finally success, right? We get our install added success message. At this point, it says press any key to continue. I'll hit enter again, and it goes back to the install screen where, lo and behold, we can see staging, development, and production, the new environment or install that I was able to create. And we can confirm this exists visually in the user portal. All right, so let me head over there. If I head over to the WP Engine user portal, you can see that I'm on the My Sites page right here. And if I scroll down to the Z's, here's my, the test site that we were working with right here, my test site ZZZ. I'm going to click through to that, and we'll take a look at the environments that exist for this site. All right, here at the top, you can see for the site, we now have production, staging, and development. So this production didn't exist a moment ago, but thanks to our CLI tool and the commands that we ran, that now exists. So now that we've seen what this CLI tool can do, let's go ahead and dig into the code a little bit so you can see how this is written and the different endpoints that it leverages. So I have the project right here, cloned down to my machine. And again, you can see that I've installed the dependencies and added my credentials to be able to make these requests. And there's really only two other files for us to take a look at. It's the index file and then the utils.js. So I actually want to take a look at utils first. This is where all the endpoint calls live. So I'll open that up, and you can see here it includes utility functions for working with the WP Engine API. First, it uses the .env npm package and calls the config method to load the environment variables from the env file into this application. And then it has a helper function here, create auth header. This is a similar one to what we saw earlier in the video that's included in my blog post. But again, this just accesses the environment variables from the env file, stores those as variables, and then creates the authorization header that's used for all other requests. Below that, we have a number of other helper functions. So fetch accounts, you can see hits the accounts endpoint here and returns that JSON response. We have fetch sites. We have fetch sites by account. So this accepts an account ID, and then it'll make sure the sites fetched are only the ones that pertain to that account ID. We have fetch installs. We have fetch installs for a specific site. We have a delete install. The user has chosen to delete one of them using our CLI tool. Create a new install. Create a new site. And I think that's the last one. Yeah, the last one here is create a new site. So you see all of these have a similar structure where they're hitting an API endpoint with a fetch call, using our helper function to create the authorization credentials there, and then taking the response and returning that to be used, in the application. So in something that you build, you can create a series of similar helper functions like this. I would recommend doing, especially this one, the auth header function, just to make that code reuse, easy for passing in those credentials. The next file to look at is just index.js, and this is where all the business logic lives, for that CLI tool. So we won't go super in depth with this, just because it's very specific to how this application works, and then that the thing you're building will be vastly different from this, depending on what you use the API for. However, we can just peruse it here for a moment. So it uses this read line and then chalk these packages from npm just to help with rendering things in the CLI application. And then you can see it also imports all of these helper functions that we saw a moment ago from utils.js. And after that, there's a number of UI, helpers here. So display a loading message, display the details about an install, to create a menu when the user has a keyboard navigable menu for them to arrow up and down and select things. There's a little helper function that deals with that, as well as rendering the menu there. Get text input from the user, prompt the user for a field, wait for key press, and then another section here, environment helpers, right? So get existing environments, get available environments. Like we saw when I used the tool, right? You don't always want to list all the environments. If staging and development already exist, then the user should actually only see prod. They shouldn't see the list of all possible ones that the API supports. This function helps with that. And then this all environments exist helper function here is the last one in that section. And then install creation flow. So a few helper functions for adding a new install. That's what I had demonstrated when I created the new production environment or install for my site. This was the function behind the scenes that then executed to add that new install. And below that, some other helper functions to kick things off, including the main function here that is called at the bottom of the file to kick everything off right here for this application. So again, this example is accessible on GitHub here. If you'd like to clone this down for yourself and peruse all the same code we just looked at in utils, in index, and so on, that's all there for you to reference, as well as the blog post that I've referenced several times here. That demo app is talked about in this article as well, along with all the other examples and things that we looked at. Last thing I'll reference on this article is it also has a section here for advanced topics. So if you are working with the API for a real-world project, this section here covers things like how to do pagination, how to do error handling, as well as rate limiting for the WP Engine API. So if you need more info on any of those topics, check out that section as well. I hope this video gave you a good understanding of what the WP Engine API is and some of the powerful things that you can do with it. Links to all of the resources that I mentioned are included in the video description below. Thanks so much for watching, and happy coding.